I want to bring in our panel now to discuss this a bit more. The anniversary. Joining us now is retired U.S. Army combat veteran Cory Mills, who's also a congressional candidate in Florida, and also joining us, Deputy Assistant to the Secretary of Defense under President Trump. She is a retired Army helicopter pilot, Amber Smith. Welcome into you both. Thank you for being with us here today.
Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
I know both of you have been active in helping get Americans and Afghan allies out of Afghanistan. But, Cory, I want to focus first on a Washington Post report. Craig Whitlock, the author, says Americans are still coming to the realization that the U.S. lost this war to the Taliban and Biden botched the Afghan withdrawal. Take a listen.
The Biden administration owns the failures of the evacuation.
I mean, we've been saying this for a year, but he's now saying the American public is just now coming to this realization. Do you think that's accurate?
Well, I think that the American public has always known that this was a failed and botched withdrawal. They didn't have the conditions-based agreement that President Trump had in place. They did not actually prioritize the safety of Americans. If they had, they would have understood that from a military strategic perspective, we would have held Bagram Air Base that could have housed 40,000 plus people. We had admin buildings established. We had chow hall facilities established. We could have done all the necessary administrative processing to get Americans and to get SIV-P2s out. And instead, they handed that over and took over HKIA, which essentially trapped Americans by stopping commercial flights from Cam Air, Ariana, Emirates, as well as for others. This was an intentional botched withdrawal. And then they try to prevent and stop teams like mine who went over to save Americans on multiple occasions, which is why it took us 11 days to conduct the very first overland rescue that was ever done by Americans for a woman and 3 children.
It really was a heroic rescue, Cory. I don't think we've talked enough about it, and I'm glad you indicated it again. I think, Bianca and Amber, what's so hard for us to understand is why the government would almost intentionally prevent people like Cory from helping do the job that they didn't seem to want to do.
I know, and now we're seeing everything, in hindsight here. And, you just heard Kilmeny, Amber, say, after the Republicans take the House back in the midterms, which all signs point to it's going to happen, that there'll be more probes over this, terrible withdrawal. A roadmap for future investigations, that's one thing. But just hearing it and being someone who is a service member and knowing that they could have done so much more must be just incredibly painful for you.
Well, it's extremely unfortunate that it's going to take a Republican Congress to get to the bottom of the debacle in Afghanistan. President Biden has blamed everyone except himself for this, and he owns every single bit of it. He's let the American people down. He's let the Afghan military veterans down, our Afghanistan partners down, and that both sides of the aisle should be able to agree on this and wants to get some answers. In terms of the failed decisions that ultimately led to the withdrawal and then ultimately the evacuation, all this did was show how weak President Biden is on foreign policy, and China and Russia had a front row seat, gave rise to Putin invading Ukraine and potentially China now taking action in Taiwan. Weakness definitely has its consequences here.
And Cory, if we look ahead to next year or the year after that, one of the key parts of Kilmeny's report focused on, American-trained commandos transferring over to other sides, China, Russia, and elsewhere. What kind of secrets? We also, could talk about all the U.S. We see the Humvees right there being driven by the Taliban. Is there any way to quantify in terms of intelligence and material what's been lost?
Well, yeah, absolutely. I mean, we know from special operations communities as well as for some of our agencies what type of training tactics, what types of TTP procedures we put in place. So those are all being shared as far as our battlefield tactics that we were training for our commandos to be able to take over, not to mention the billions of dollars that was left behind in armament defense, the Humvees that you just pointed out, but also MRAPs, Mark 19s, and even attack helicopters. So we have to look at the fact that we as the American people, and specifically as the Biden administration, has just provided the most well-trained, well-equipped terrorist organizations in the world with Taliban, Haqqani Network, and ISIS Khorasan. This is very terrifying for the rest of America. And like Amber had just pointed out, I've written articles called The Great Superpower Resurgence that talks about this Russia, China, Iran geopolitical alignment and what that means as far as us being weaker on the national stage for a future attack.
We're going to continue to stay on this, and we hope to have you guys back as we look at this issue and the implications from the disastrous withdrawal from Afghanistan. Cory, Amber, great to have you both. Thank you. And thank you for your service.
Great to see you again, John.
Thanks, John.
Thank you so much.